Hello, my name is Jacob Monk. Welcome to this second part of my video about the Reformation in Denmark. In the first part, I told you how the Reformation was set up in Denmark. It was a war, it was a military campaign done by the king called Christian III and his German general called Rantzau. This Rantzau, he hired a lot of German soldiers for the money he had from Christian III, and they went up through Jutland, a part of Denmark, and killed around 2,000 peasants there. 2,000 compared to the very small population of Denmark being around 1 million at that time. Well, they killed 2,000 Catholic soldiers before they came to Aalborg, the main city, one of the main cities in Jutland, and there they found the leader of the Catholic in Jutland. The Catholics constituted the great majority. Protestants were only a very small minority, probably less than 10%. Well, this man, he was taken to prison and he was tortured. But first they sacked the city because Rantzau, he put his soldiers around the city. He told them to give up. If they didn't give up and opened the fortification ports of the city, then the whole city would be burned down. But after some time, he got his way into the city and he told his soldiers to sack everything, that is, to rape the women, to kill the men, to kill even the children, and to steal everything they wanted. But only for 3 days. After 3 days, there was normal civil order again. And that's what they did. So they terrorized the citizens of Aalborg, just as they had killed 2,000 peasants before they came there. And the leader, skipper Clement, he was called, he was put in prison and there he was tortured for some days. And after that, he was beheaded publicly at the Grand Central Square in Aalborg. After that, Rantzau's soldiers went to Copenhagen and they started using the same tactic in Copenhagen. The soldiers was placed all around the town and the citizens in the town were told to open the city ports so they could get in. But they didn't do so before 6 months had passed by and they had absolutely no food left in the city. So they could choose if they wanted to starve to death or allow the soldiers of Rantzau and the Protestant king, Christian III, to enter town. And that is what they did. That happened in 1536, and this is what is called the Reformation. It was a victory from a king, a Protestant king, an illegal fight against the legal government of Denmark and the former king called Christian II. He was imprisoned, but now Christian III, he went into Copenhagen with the soldiers of Rantzau. And first thing they did was to put any Catholic bishops in prison. They found the leading Catholic bishop called Joachim Rønnow. They found him in his private home, the Bishop Palace. He was trying to hide up under the roof, but this was not possible for him. The soldiers of Rantzau, they found him. He was very afraid that the same should happen to him as had happened to skipper Clement in Aalborg. As I told you, he was tortured and beheaded. And Joachim Rønnow was afraid the same should happen to him. So he hid it away. But he was found, and also the other 7 Catholic bishops. They were all found and put to prison. And there they had to live for the rest of their life. Joachim Rønnow, he died after 6 years. He had been living in Blåtårn, a very nasty prison in the fortification of Copenhagen. Today it's called Christiansborg. It is the place where the Danish parliament has its meetings. At that time it was the main fortification. It was a city castle in Copenhagen, the strongest city castle we had here. Well, this was the way the Reformation was put through. And after the Reformation, the first thing that happened was that it was made illegal to be a Catholic. It was told that there would be death sentence for any kind of Catholic propaganda. And you know, Norway was a part of Denmark at that time. Short time after the Reformation, 2 Norwegian peasants were burned at the stake because they had sung one hymn to Virgin Mary. That's all they had done. And they went first to jail, and after that they were sentenced as Catholics, and that meant they went to the stake, death sentence, and they were burned. So it was not legal to be a Catholic. If you came to Denmark as a Catholic priest, you would be executed immediately. So we didn't have any kind of freedom. And instead of the Pope, we had a new leader. It was the King of Denmark. And the King of Denmark was a very nasty leader. And also his successors, they were even worse. One of the worst was called Christian IV. He was the one who built a lot of palaces in Copenhagen. The Danes remember him as a very nice Danish king. He had 24 children and a lot of mistresses, so he certainly didn't follow the Christian morality. But he didn't care at all, because the only women he was really engaged with was first his mistresses, second the young witches that he liked to burn. 1,000 women, young women, were burned for being witches during the times after the Reformation. Not one single woman have ever been burned in Denmark before the Reformation, but up until the 17th century, 1,000 witches were burned at the stake. And especially during Christian IV, around 500 witches were burned. And Christian IV, he just enjoyed to sit by the fire and listen to the women screaming in pain before they died, because they found out it took between 3 and 10 minutes for a young woman to die when you put fire under her at the stake. Usually she didn't die because of the fire, but because of the smoke coming from the fire. She couldn't breathe, and therefore she died. But if they made a smaller fire, then there wouldn't come as much heat and as much smoke up. And that meant that she would be really burned, starting from the legs and going up. She would burn slowly. It would take maybe around 10 minutes before she died. And Christian IV, he had the idea that it was very important for the witches not only to die, but also to suffer, to be tortured before they died. Because the idea was the more you suffer when you're living, the less you have to suffer after you are dead. And although they had refused the Catholic concept of purgatory, they still believed in heaven and hell. And of course, every witch will go to hell. And according to the Bible, in Old Testament, it's written very clear that a witch has to be burned. And you know, Luther had told the Protestant in Denmark, always follow the Bible. So when the Bible says any witch has to be burned, well, that is what we have to do. So this was really Lutheran. I wouldn't call it Christian, I would call it demonic, but it was Lutheran religion in practice. Well, at 1660, we had a dictatorship. The king before 1660, he was elected by the nobility in Denmark. After that, the king was not elected at all. He was a successor. The king had to be child of a former king. They had to be child of an even former king. So you understand, the only way to be king or queen in Denmark after 1660 was to be son or daughter of another queen or king. The reason for this change compared to the former way we had elected kings, it was that the king, he wanted unlimited power because of all the wars we have had with the Swedes. In 1660, the Swedish nearly conquered whole Denmark, and we had a peace called Roskilde-freden, the peace treaty of Roskilde. Roskilde, it's a small city around 30 kilometers from Copenhagen, the main city in Denmark. And according to this peace agreement, we had to give Skåne, Halland and Blekinge, that is all the Danish provinces in Sweden, we have to give them to the Swedish king. So now Øresund, the water between Denmark and Sweden, it was the border of Denmark. And now Copenhagen was not anymore placed in the center of the Danish country. It was actually out in the periphery, out very close to our enemy number one, and this enemy was Sweden. Maybe I didn't told you that Christian IV, who loved to burn the witches, who burned 500 witches, he also participated in the 30 Years' War. He himself, he was leader of a Danish military force trying to go up against the Emperor of Germany. Well, he went to Luther am Bahnbeim, and there he put his soldiers to war with the soldiers of the German emperor. Most of the Danish soldiers were killed, but the king, he flew away, as he was used to every time there was a war. Well, he liked to have wars, but he didn't like to participate in them himself. Actually, there's only one case where Christian IV has participated in a war, and this case was when he was captain on a ship fighting against the Swedes, and he had one bullet in his eye, and as soon as that happened, he ordered a painter to paint a big picture of him being wounded, so he could show the Danes that he was some kind of war hero. But matter of fact, he was exactly the opposite. He was very afraid of war, and when he started up this war against the Germans, well, then he flew away as refugee number one himself. And he left his soldiers to fight and to die against the Germans, because the Germans were much stronger and they have much more soldiers. So therefore the German emperor, he conquered most of Jutland and he drew back, but it left a problem. And this problem was solved in 1864, where the new Danish king, 1864, he fought against the Germans about the southern part of Jutland. And again, the Danes lost this war. And therefore, we lost the southern part of Jutland. And I have to say, before that happened, we had also lost Norway. That happened in 1812 because of the British. They wanted Norway to be independent of Denmark because the Danish king had supported Napoleon. So now we had lost, after the Reformation, Norway, Sweden, southern part of Jutland. And Denmark was reduced to 30% of the size we had before the Reformation. So the Reformation was a disaster for Denmark. Our economy went totally broke because of the wars we had against the Swedes and against the Germans. We didn't have that kind of money, and therefore the kings had to introduce a dictatorship to force the peasants to pay as much as they could to the king, because the king was the one who was running the military forces. So Denmark was one of the most repressive governments in Europe from around 1536 until 1889, when we had a democratic constitution. But still, after this constitution, 1849, well, Catholics didn't have the same right in Denmark as Protestant. Even today, 2017, all Catholics have to pay tax to the Lutheran Church. This is written in our constitution, that the state has to support the Lutheran Church. That is, they have to pay money to the Lutheran priest, the Lutheran churches. All education is done according to Lutheran faith. And every kind of Catholicism is said that is very bad. That is why, Denmark is not a real member of the European Union, because the European Union is considered to be a Catholic network of countries. Therefore, the Danish king and the Danish politicians don't want to be a real member. We have so-called restrictions against all the kind of networking that is going on in the European Union. We are not member of the Euro. We don't take part in the police forces working together, and a lot of other very central parts of the European Union. We are not working with that because we want to be what is called independent. By independent, it means we want to keep on being Lutherans, being Protestant. We don't want to be dominated by Poland, France, Italy, Spain, and so on, by all these Catholic countries. So the Reformation was a disaster for Denmark. Today, Denmark, if you're living in a house, you have to pay around 5,000 kroner extra every year. Why? Because when you lend money in the institutions in Denmark, in the banks, or where you get money to finance your house, then you pay extra amount of rent, because we are not member of the Euro. Therefore, we have between 0.5 and 1.0, that is between a half and a whole % of rent, more than they have in Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. Therefore, they pay around 5,000 kroner less every year to have a house the same size and quality as the houses we have in Denmark. And this is because we are not member of the Euro, and this is because Denmark is a separatist country, a Protestant country. We are still protesting, like Martin Luther did in 1521. The Danish politicians are still protesting against the Treaty of Rome, against the Catholics, against the Pope, and against everything in Europe. And therefore, Danes want to be, I should say, the Danish politicians wants Denmark to be an American colony. Denmark is a little dog running after a big dog. We don't care what the Americans do. They can kill, they can bomb, they can invade everywhere in the world. No politician in Denmark will raise their eyebrow. They only care about one thing, that is to follow the Americans. The American politicians, they used to be Protestants, and the policy is 100% immoral, illegal, and imperialistic. I don't have to go in details about all the countries that the American has invaded after Second World War. It is about 30 different countries. Remember Libya, Afghanistan, Syria, where there are illegal American troops at the moment, Afghanistan, Yugoslavia, and so on and so forth. These are all illegal operations, not according to law, not according to decisions in United Nations, but done only by the Americans because they hope to defend their own interest and to defend the dollar and to try out the new American weapons. And Denmark is a small and uncritical, I would also say very immoral and very unintelligent follower of USA. This is all because of the Reformation. So therefore we Danes, we have to thank the European politicians and royalty that has tried to roll back the Reformations. They didn't succeed, but there was a queen in Sweden called Queen Christina. Actually, she converted to Catholic religion. She had the French philosopher Descartes as her personal teacher. We only also know that Corfitz Ulfeldt, he was what could be called the Danish Prime Minister in 1658. He was also a crypto-Catholic. Remember, it was illegal to be a Catholic at that time. So people who wanted to be Catholic, they had to hide it. But Corfitz Ulfeldt and his wife, who was called Leonora Christina, she was the daughter of Christian IV. Well, she was put in jail because the Danish kings, they want to get Corfitz Ulfeldt to admit his crimes after he had fled from the country. Well, they didn't succeed. Corfitz Ulfeldt, he died before he came back to Denmark. Actually, he never came back to Denmark. But Leonora Christina, his wife, she's still buried in a church in Denmark, a Birgitine church that once was a part of a Catholic monastery. Well, the Reformation was a disaster for Denmark. I don't know how the future will be, but we are still living in the fight between the immoral forces of the Reformation, of Martin Luther's philosophy. You know, he was an anti-Semite. He was a follower of dictatorship of the king and the nobility in the German provinces. Yes, he was a racist, and he didn't believe that human beings had a free will. Martin Luther was very much for burning witches, and he had the idea that human beings were just evil persons. Well, not only the witches were very bad according to Luther, but also the Jews, they should be killed. The Pope, he should be killed. The Catholic, they should be killed. The Calvinists, they should be killed. The peasants, they should be killed. Well, this was the receipt of Martin Luther. Every time someone was not a follower of Martin Luther, they should be killed. That was what he wrote, and that was the way it was practiced, not only in Denmark, but also in the Protestant Germany. So I hope and I pray that the Reformation will soon be ended, but because the Reformation has been a very dark, a very immoral, and a very bad time for Denmark. Until now, 500 years has been going since Luther he put up his thesis on the church door in Wittenberg, but still the Reformation is going on. But the anti-Reformation, the counter-Reformation is also going on. And my hope is that the positive forces in this world, the forces that believe in peace, the forces that believe in free will, the anti-racist forces, they will win in the end. And Lutheranism, coming from the Reformation, will be a bad dream from the past. That is what I pray for. Thank you for listening.